When Disney first announced The Lion King, they chose to claim that it was Walt Disney's first official original story, though many fans in the world know this isn't true. From being accused of taking inspiration from a Japanese manga turned anime named Kimba, to fans suggesting that The Lion King was Disney's version of Hamlet, almost everyone believes that the movie was at least inspired by a previous story. Well, it looks like that might be true, and to make things more interesting, it seems like that story might have been based on real history. Sadly though, the real story of The Lion King is much darker than Disney's version. Trying to discover the true origin of The Lion King was no easy feat, and not for the reason you might think. Instead of there being a lack of sources for their inspiration, it looks like Disney pulled from a bunch of different stories to create the animated classic that's beloved by fans young and old. According to an extra segment in the Platinum edition of The Lion King on DVD, the creators even confirmed that they took some inspiration from the lives depicted in the Bible, specifically Moses and Joseph. That being said, there is one version of The Lion King that almost everyone recognizes as the true inspiration for the movie, and that's Hamlet, the play by William Shakespeare. However, in the case of Hamlet, his life was far more tragic than Simba's in The Lion King, though they're still very comparable. Where Disney's story followed the life of Simba as he dealt with his father's death and lived in exile, only to return home and usurp his murderous uncle, Shakespeare's Hamlet followed the story of Hamlet, who dealt with the death of basically his entire family. He then also lived in exile, only to return home and kill his uncle as well as himself and his mother. It's like the Game of Thrones version of The Lion King. Now, for those unfamiliar with the story of Hamlet, here are the basics. You'll see that there are more than enough similarities between both stories to say that Hamlet inspired Disney's animated musical. In the play, Hamlet was the Prince of Denmark. The story opens with the mysterious death of Hamlet's father, the King of Denmark, which is followed by Hamlet's uncle taking the throne and marrying the Queen, Hamlet's mother. The prince eventually had a vision of his father's ghost and informed Hamlet that it was his uncle who killed the king. And though this was slightly different from what happened to Simba, the story remains the same. The king was killed by his brother, and the king's ghost returned to tell the prince of his uncle's treachery and to warn him to save the kingdom. Granted, Hamlet's life was much darker than Simba's. You see, throughout the play, not only was Hamlet exiled like Simba was, but Hamlet's sense of loss didn't end when his father died. Throughout the play, the love of his life, Ophelia, also died, and if that wasn't heartbreaking enough, upon Hamlet's return to the kingdom, he was forced to face Ophelia's brother in combat, at which point he was cut by a poisoned blade. However, before the poison could kill him, Hamlet noticed that his mother, the queen, had drank poisoned wine, which resulted in her death. And in a blind rage, the prince made his way over to his uncle, stabbed him through his heart, and then poured poisoned wine down his throat. Talk about hardcore. But still, despite the countless similarities between Hamlet and The Lion King, there is speculation by some fans as to whether or not the creators at Disney meant to directly copy the Shakespearean play. This is probably because Hamlet was so much darker than The Lion King. But as Disney has shown with many of their fairy tales in the past, they enjoy bringing a lighthearted tone to otherwise dark and dreary folktales. That being said, there is another slightly more accurate source that Disney may have pulled from when coming up with the inspiration for their animated classic. And that history itself, which happens to be like Hamlet, is quite a bit darker than Disney's version of the story. Now, whether the creators of The Lion King wanted to give him credit or not, the real inspiration for the movie came from a man named Sundiata Keita, who many equate to being the real Simba. This is a story that was originally passed down by Mandinka griots, who were traveling poets from West Africa, and is based on a real African prince who went into exile before returning home to reclaim his throne. And once you hear the ancient epic, you'll see that the similarities between Sundiata's story and Simba's story are so similar that they even share the title of Lion King. The Mandinka, also referred to as Malinki, are a group of people primarily found in southern Mali, West Africa. And toward the end of the 12th century, they had a king, or Fama, named Nare Magan Kanote, and you can think of him as Mufasa, a king that kept the peace among his people and was seemingly adored according to the story. The big difference here is that Mufasa was married to Sarabi and didn't seem to have any other mate, at least not that we knew of directly. However, in Nare's case, he had a beautiful wife named Sasuma Barete, and together they had a son named Dankaran, who was not in the Simba history, and that's part of what makes the real Simba's story so tragic. According to the epic, after Nare married his wife and they started their family, he learned of a prophecy that foretold of King Nare marrying an ugly woman, and together they would have a child who would go on to become the greatest king who ever lived. So, despite already being married and having a family, it said that King Nare married a second wife named Sogalon, said to be so ugly that people called her the Buffalo Woman. And according to history, the two did indeed have a son together, whom they named Sundiata. Sadly though, on the surface, Sunjata wasn't exactly the Lion King that his father was looking for, since the child was born with birth defects that made him a cripple. This began the tragic story of the real-life Lion King. You see, in the Disney classic, no one in the Pridelands would dare to bully Simba for fear of facing Mufasa's wrath. But that wasn't the case for Sunjata. As he grew up, being crippled affected him in both physical and mental ways, especially with all of the ridicule that he supposedly got from his half-brother Dankaran and Nare's first wife. One day, though, Sunjata surprised everyone when he decided that the only way to end the bullying from his brother would be if he learned to walk properly. And at that moment, he supposedly made the decision to start walking. And by sheer willpower alone, he was able to do just that. This was one of the few positive moments in Sunjata's life as a child. That and the fact that King Nare supposedly favored Sunjata over Dankaran, as the king still believed that the prophecy was true. Sadly, much like Simba learned at a young age in The Lion King, death can take love out of your life faster than you can say goodbye. King Nare's death is another way that Sunjata's life mirrored Simba's. Granted, Nare wasn't trampled by a stampede. Though the rumors were never proven to be true, many speculated that Dankaran and the queen were responsible for King Nare's death because it happened before he could announce Sunjata as his successor, thus continuing Sunjata's tragic life, which was proven to be a darker, historically accurate version of The Lion King. Much like Simba was convinced by his father's killer to run away from home, Sunjata and his mother were worried that Dankaran would try to have them killed, so they fled from the palace and left the kingdom. According to the historical efforts, Sunjata and his immediate family spent years in exile, and over the course of those years they traveled throughout the Ghana Empire before finally ending up in Mima, a region in Mali, Africa. The king of Mima gave Sunjata's family a safe haven and quickly became fascinated by the young, formerly crippled prince. And according to history, Sunjata was given a position high up in the kingdom of Mima, which helped him finally turn the tide on the family that once ridiculed him. Sadly, the real-life Lion King had to learn about one more tragedy before he was able to claim the throne. When Sunjata was in exile, the Mandinka people were conquered by the king from the Soso Empire, King Somaru Kante, and because of that, the Mandinka were in turmoil and felt that their only chance at peace again would be to rise under the banner of the true king. They quickly sent messengers to Mima to persuade Sunjata to come back to his home and liberate his people from the Sosa king's tyrannous reign. Sunjata is said to have agreed, and when he returned to his homeland, he made sure to not show up without an army. According to the historical epic, many of the warlords of Mali from that time period joined Sunjata on his return to help him liberate the Mandinka people. And much like Simba battled Scar at the Battle of Pride Rock, Sunjata and his army faced the Soso king at the Battle of Karina. And much like the Disney film, the rightful king was the only one left standing. Prince Sunjata and his army beat the Soso emperor, and Sunjata was officially named the first emperor of what was referred to as the Mali Empire. Just like Simba reunited the Pridelands, Sunjata successfully reunited and liberated the Mandinka people, and in the process he was given the title of the Lion King. This was because not only was he the rightful king of those lands, but the name Sunjata was actually derived from a combination of his mother's name, Sogalon, and the Mandinka word Jata, which means lion. What do you think about the origin of the Lion King? Did Simba's story live up to the tragic but inspirational life of Prince Sunjata? Make sure to let us know in the comments below.